6 different things. And, well,
this is not some kind of a theater or a carnival. This is a very solemn occasion.
The Premier was out of the loop, the Health Authority was out of the loop, and the people of Richmond were out of the loop. Now, whether you're for or against the principle of drug consumption sites, there's 2 things to keep in mind. One, there's a big difference between a staff report based on a firm plan and a councillor motion based on long-term desire. And there's also a big difference between a motion that makes things easy for staff to start exploring ideas and a motion that causes a headache, or in Richmond's case this time, a big migraine. Justin McElroy, CBC News, Vancouver.
The BC government has unveiled a new plan to create hundreds of rental housing units built on underused public land. The homes would be available to middle-income earners already living in those communities. However, as Mira Baines reports, critics are skeptical that there will be enough supply to provide meaningful relief to struggling families.
A highly anticipated centerpiece of the BC government's housing plan has been unveiled. With BC Builds, the province plans to bring in more affordable rental housing.
We know that the private sector alone has not been able to deliver the middle-income housing that we need.
The BC Builds plan focuses on a critical gap in providing affordable housing to middle-income earners. Housing types would range from studio apartments to 3- and 4-bedroom units. To qualify, households earning between $85,000 to $192,000 would be income tested.
The units we're announcing today is 400 units across 3 different projects. We have about 20 different partners that are in the queue right now, an additional 4,000 units.
It works by partnering nonprofit housing providers, public agencies, First Nations, and community groups to build rental housing on what's considered underused land. The land could include parking lots near community centers, next to long-term care homes, and areas near hospitals. The price tag is huge. The province says it will spend $950 million and provide $2 billion in low-cost financing for construction. Rents will be on a community-to-community basis.
The rents for BC Builds will not exceed market rent for the community. This means more households will be able to find market rent and spend less than 30% of their income on rent.
It sounds good on paper, but short on details.
We're not just building single-family units. We're building up, we're building density, and that needs the corresponding infrastructure to go along with it. So we're encouraged by this message, but we need to know how it's going to be done.
The official opposition's housing critic says with a fall election, voters won't have time to see if the program is effective.
So this is just another example of some promises that are going to take a number of years to be able to see if they're working.
Still, the province says the goal is to speed up construction projects to 12 to 18 months compared to 3 to 5 years. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
For more on what the province's housing announcement means, we're joined by Tom Davidoff. He's an associate professor at UBC Sauder School of Business. Tom, thanks so much for being on the show. Good evening to you.
Thank you so much.
So the housing minister cited Vienna's model of government-led housing as the inspiration for this BC Builds program. What kind of timeline is realistic in your mind in terms of steering such a massive ship? And is there a chance it's too late to switch to that model after decades of private development?
Yeah, I think for the most part, British Columbia, particularly Greater Vancouver and Victoria, are going to be dominated by private market housing. I see this as an opportunistic program where municipal governments have some land to donate or nonprofits do to help them speed up their own development, maybe municipal workforce housing, nonprofit housing, sort of opportunistic projects. But most housing in British Columbia by far is always going to be private market.
So you sound somewhat skeptical this will make much of a dent, perhaps, in the affordability crisis. Looking at other places like Vienna, how has it been successful there, and what could we take from that to mirror here to make it also successful here?
Well, buy up all the land before it gets too expensive. That's what happened in Singapore and Vienna. They wouldn't be able to build on the scale they have if they were starting from where we are today. If way back in the day, in the city of Vancouver, when it was all trees, maybe it would have been possible, but no. Look, I'm not skeptical. I think this is a good project. I think it has merit, but it's not a solution to the housing affordability problem by any means.
And we know that this is a long-term project, yes. When do you anticipate we'll be able to determine whether it ultimately was a success? And what would be the measuring stick for that, to determine that?
Well, again, I think it's a project by project basis. North Vancouver, Gibson's, a couple other places are the first projects. If they get completed, the homes are adequate, people are getting housed, and government's getting close to breaking even on the deal, then all you've done is accelerated housing and provided housing for some people that these municipalities wanted to house. So, let's see how these projects go. Are they able to move as quickly as anticipated?
Another one of those wait and sees for sure. Thank you so much for your insight today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Tom Davidoff is an associate professor at UBC Sauder School of Business. Well, population growth, homelessness, affordability, those were all some of the topics headlining this year's Housing Summit hosted by the Union of BC Municipalities. Provincial mayors and councillors criticized the province's aggressive housing targets, saying they were told to execute certain goals, but were neither asked if it was possible nor given enough resources to meet them.
Frankly, they've been, in British Columbia, distracted by political narratives that are, giving people a sense that housing is on its way. Good feelings, I call it. They've been trying to instill good feelings rather than actually build the housing that people need.
The UBCM Housing Summit continues tomorrow with Federal Housing Minister Sean Fraser slated to speak. Well, the homeless and the unhoused in Canada are facing a life and death crisis. That's according to a newly released report on the growing number of tent encampments across the country. As Megan Fitzpatrick reports, it calls Canada's system broken.
The federal housing advocate Marie-Josée Houle released a final report today. She calls it a deep dive into the issue of homeless encampments. She undertook this review about a year ago, and it takes a look at why the number of encampments has been growing in recent years, especially since the pandemic. She says in her report that it's not just big cities like here in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal that are seeing a growing number of encampments, but in smaller municipalities as well, and in rural areas. When she took a look at some of the root causes for the encampments, she's talking about a lack of affordable, accessible housing. She also says discrimination plays a role here.
And when we're talking about the root causes of encampments, we're talking about racism, colonialism, poverty, the breakdown of our welfare system, the breakdown of our health systems, the breakdown of our mental health systems, the breakdown of our housing and homelessness systems.
She also said in terms of emergency shelters that some municipalities offer, well, there's often challenges associated with those. Here in Toronto, for example, they're often full, as well as the conditions of those emergency shelters. They just don't work for some people. She also said one of the problems and one of the barriers to solving this problem of homelessness is a lack of coordination among various levels of government and also a lack of political will. She says here some stigma plays into that lack of political will. Now, Houle says her report is an urgent call to action for all levels of government in Canada, and that Canada does have the capacity to tackle this issue. Megan Fitzpatrick, CBC News, Toronto.
We know a record number of people died in BC from toxic drugs last year. Of those, turns out 77% were men. And the province has identified construction sites now as high-risk workplaces for overdoses.
When you're in construction, your body's put through a lot. It's a very physical job. It's outdoors, often transient work where you're out of town for extended periods of time. And that can lead to working through pain and seeking ways to manage that pain with self-medication.
One expert says this tendency is heightened when men aren't taught to prioritize their mental health.
As boys are sort of socialized to be men, we're taught to distance ourselves from emotions and from communicating with others what we feel inside, whether it's good, bad, or ugly.
He says for some men, especially those working in construction or other manual labor jobs, substances often replace healthy coping mechanisms. The regional chief of the BC Assembly of First Nations is calling recent reactions to proposed changes to BC's Land Act a threat to reconciliation. He calls it fear-mongering at its worst. Arlene Young spoke with CBC reporter Jackie McKay about what the land changes would actually mean.
So, Jackie, you've been following this story, tracking all of it. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So can you break down the chief's comments for us?
Yeah, so what we're hearing a lot of is things like this is going to give First Nations a veto. It's going to stop resource development. We don't actually need this because there's already Section 35 of the Constitution, which is the duty to consult. None of these things are true, and this is much different than the duty to consult. So that's a lot of the misinformation that's spreading around that the chief is talking about in those statements.
Okay, so what is actually being proposed to be changed in the Land Act?
So what's being proposed to be changed? First of all, I think it should be clear that we haven't seen a bill yet. It hasn't been drafted, so we actually don't know what it's going to say. So a lot of this is just speculation that is this misinformation going around. But what it's actually going to do is it's going to bring First Nations in from the start of the bill. So instead of someone coming in saying, hey, we want to use Crown lands, they call the government calls the First Nation, and then the First Nation says, we're okay with this, we're not okay with this, could you change this? And then they go back to the government goes back. Instead, the person who wants to use the land is going to have to call them both at the same time. And the government and the First Nation together are going to talk about it and just be say, we're okay with this, we're not okay with this, come up with a criteria together, and then go back to the proponent and then say, you can lease the land, but this is what we want. So it's actually going to make things more streamlined for a lot of resources. And it has the potential that way to stop litigations, because a lot of the litigations we see in BC are over conflicts of not feeling they're consulted enough or having those consultations ignored. So under the duty to consult, yeah, maybe the government has to consult the First Nation, but they don't necessarily have to do what they say. It's up to the minister in charge to make the decision. So this is going to give more power to the First Nation to also sign off on those agreements.
Right, and that brings them in from the beginning, so we don't see that litigation going back and forth.
Potentially, yes, that's the idea.
Hope. Right, okay, all right. Thank you so much for that. That's Jackie McKay.
If you have Valentine's Day plans and were planning to order an Uber, well, you may have to reconsider. Thousands of ride-hailing and food delivery drivers are expected to go on a one-day strike tomorrow.
Protection, no benefits, no overtime. When you're sitting like 2 hours, who's going to pay for that? So we are wasting our time on the roads every day and getting nothing back. Even working hard, 12 hours, 13 hours every day, and we can't even earn like the minimum wage.
He says the striking rideshare and food delivery drivers include those employed by Uber, Lyft, Skip, Uber Eats, and DoorDash. Well, the city of Burnaby is asking and sending Parkland Refinery a bill for $30,000. It's to recover the city's costs for extra firefighters deployed to the refinery after equipment failure sent a plume of smoke and strong odor across the Lower Mainland last month. 34 firefighters and 11 fire trucks rushed to the refinery in response. Dozens of firefighters stayed for roughly 6 hours. And that meant the city had to call in off-duty firefighters to cover other calls that day. Now, Burnaby does have a bylaw that allows the city to try to recover costs related to calls like this if the standby lasts for more than an hour. The Vancouver Fire Department is warning e-bike owners about potential fire hazards with e-bikes following 2 separate calls over the weekend. In a social media post, crews warn e-bike owners to avoid cheap batteries, never try and modify an e-bike, and never leave a bike unattended while it's charging. The department says its firefighters answer upwards of 50 calls every year stemming from exploding e-bike batteries. In 2022, 5 people died from rechargeable battery fires. A group advocating for sex workers' rights is calling on Richmond City Council to reject a proposal that would increase fines and the number of raids on massage parlors. The organization says going after licensed businesses forces women to work from apartments where they don't have the same protections. Similarly, Surrey cracked down on massage parlors a few years ago, and one advocate says the effects were devastating.
They didn't have the same protections that they do in those licensed businesses, and to be honest, we lost track of a few of them. We don't know where they are, and we still think about them today.
She says police raids can terrify women, meaning they're less likely to call RCMP when they're in trouble. Some Richmond City councillors say massage parlor owners are taking advantage of financially vulnerable women. While this year's winter's unusually warm weather has been painful for those who love snow sports, golfers, meanwhile, are loving the balmy conditions. As our David Ball is finding out, Vancouver's golf courses are at full capacity, even in the middle of winter.
Tee-off time at Langara Golf Course. Not a sound normally associated with mid-February, but the unusually warm weather has some getting their clubs and caddies from winter storage.
So it's very early, but season definitely can begin very soon. I feel like today, summer, early summer maybe. Come out and play golf.
The fairway's quite dry. The drainage is working.
This course, the amount of drainage they put in, it used to be a swamp at this time of year, but now it's perfectly playable. It's magic.
Yeah, we are lucky. So we have really nice weather today, so we are enjoying. If it's we have sun, then we come out use the chance to play more.
The park board says only 10 days have been lost to cold weather this winter, and all of them in January, months later than usual, and the warmth soon returned.
This is fantastic from our perspective. Not great for skiing, but really great for golf. So you can see here on a sunny day at Langara, we're full capacity with the daylight we have.
Is this earlier than usual that you'd have people out and opening and also this many people out?
Well, it's a little bit different this year. We usually get most of our snow or closure days in November, December. So that came a little later, so we had a banner November and December.
The city says its courses saw 32% more golf rounds played in those months than previous years. Some of the heat that shuttered ski hills but opened fairways is thanks to the current El Niño weather pattern. But experts also say climate change is bringing hotter, drier summers and droughts.
It's absolutely top of mind, not only in the golf industry, but park board wide, citywide, and the whole region. And really, we're starting to be more and more proactive in our planning. Some of the technologies that we have in golf really help with our water usage.
The city recently spent $3 million on better course drainage to store that winter water for dry spells ahead, and turning parts of all 3 of its courses into no-mow areas without carbon-emitting maintenance or chemicals.
We hope everything goes normally as it was. So our climate change it makes difference, but yeah, hope not. We don't have drought.
For now, golfers in the city are making the most of the balmy conditions to enjoy a few extra winter rounds.
Beautiful.
David Ball, CBC News, Vancouver.
Our Darius Madavi is away this week, so weathercaster Victor Paolo joins us now with our first look at the weather. And Victor, the golfers are certainly happy, but have you got anything in the forecast for the mountains that might make the skiers happy?
Well, you know, we are expecting some colder temperatures when it's more north of BC, and that's where we're going to be expecting that snow to come. But for right now, Vancouver is going to be beautiful for Valentine's Day tomorrow. And looking at all of those golf videos, I woke up to a Tiger Woods video about his new brand coming out. Golf is speaking to me, but let's move along with weather. Here's a look at what we're going to be expecting here in the Vancouver area for your Valentine's Day. As you see, overnight tonight is going to be partly cloudy, not too much clouds, and that is great news because that leads us into your Valentine's Day Wednesday. Let me take a step to the side here. 8 degrees, feels like 5. There will be warm and love in the air. You gotta love it. And the one thing we can also look forward to when it comes to your Wednesday, there's 0 precipitation, which we're expecting. We're gonna be seeing that one on Thursday. But when it comes to your Valentine's Day, the big thing is here, you want to make plans to be outdoors, go for a nice walk with your loved ones. Make sure to stay tuned for the rest of your 3- and 5-day forecast. Over to you.
Thank you. I've never thought to be so excited about a forecast for Valentine's Day, but man, you've got me jazzed right up. Thanks so much, Victor.
Always a pleasure.
In other news, now it's a familiar problem here in the Lower Mainland. Parents struggling to find childcare for their kids as they head back to work. And in smaller communities across BC, that lack of childcare is being felt as well. The CBC's Shelley Joyce caught up with one mom and 2 educators who say the wait lists are simply too long and parents are being left to find alternate solutions that are potentially life-changing.
Desperate would describe it, which is also so sad because you shouldn't be desperate to find childcare. You should be finding childcare that you feel safe at, like, leaving your child with. My name is Laura Poser, and I am a full-time stay-at-home mom of 2 small boys. I am a finance manager, so I am going back to work in November. Trying to get childcare was insanely stressful. I found out I was pregnant, and within the month of finding out that I was pregnant, I went on about 12 wait lists. I just called so many people trying to get some sort of permanent position.
Our waitlist at the moment is over 800 names. My name is Karen Sutherland. I am the Executive Director of Children's Circle Childcare Center. They're desperate. We do take calls from mothers where they can't return to work after maternity leave. Their husband will have to give up their job because they have no one to care for the children. And it's desperate. There is often tears on those calls.
We've known this is an issue for a long time, and we're seeing that our educators are facing difficult work conditions. 50% of early childhood educators leave the field within the first 5 years. So we can educate people, but we also need to create decent working conditions for them to want to have a career in early childhood education. My name is Carolyn Hendra. I'm an assistant teaching professor here at Thompson Rivers University in the Early Childhood Education Department. So the childcare at TRU their priority is for faculty and for TRU students' children, and then any other spaces that are available would be open to the community. Our waiting list is years long. It's safe to say that parents are struggling to find childcare and throwing their names on every wait list in the city, hoping that by the time they need the childcare, it might be available.
You can go on as many wait lists as you like in town, and there just seems to be no calls that are incoming, and it's incredibly scary and frustrating for parents.
That's the reality of it, is people are just trying to find care, and I mean, not that they could care less of what the quality is, but they just don't have any options. It's just so sad.
Coming up next, what BC couples should know before moving in together and how to tackle that awkward money talk. That's after the break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. A wildlife tunnel built under a newly twinned section of highway in Nova Scotia appears to be doing what it's intended to do. As Paul Palmater tells us, the animals are learning to take advantage of it as a safer way to cross the road.
This structure was built between the Hansport and Falmouth exits as a measure to provide more safety to drivers on the recently twinned Highway 101. It's a wildlife underpass or tunnel, and it may have taken animals a while to figure it out.
You typically see about a year before they're confident to start using the structure. It's obviously quite foreign to them, and they need to develop a degree of comfort with it before they will successfully enter and move all the way through a structure as long as this one.
These pictures captured by trail cameras and released by the department show deer are using the tunnel. While people like to see deer, they can be a menace near a highway. The fields in this area are littered with a significant white-tailed deer population that now can no longer travel across the highway at this location. They are now kept off the road surface by 3 kilometers of fencing that leads down to the tunnel. Other changes have been made to try and entice animals to travel all the way through.
One of the things that we've done is add logs and rocks to naturalize the interior a bit more, make it look a little less open, a little less scary. And almost as soon as we had that completed and other construction around the site had ceased, we started to see animals successfully moving all the way through the crossing.
The fence is located near a long bend in the highway where an average of 7,600 vehicles travel every day. Prior to the highway being twinned and the fencing put in place, there were an average of 9 vehicle-wildlife collisions a year, with the majority of them being deer. But other animals are also using the tunnel.
We've also seen regular use by raccoons, porcupines, at least one fox, and there has been a coyote sniffing around, but he hasn't built up the nerve to actually go through the crossing yet, as far as we can tell.
The fencing and 50-meter-long tunnel, which has an atrium at the midpoint to allow light to come in, cost over $1 million. but it's now making for a safer section of highway for both humans and animals for decades to come. Paul Pometer, CBC News, Falmouth.
Well, Valentine's Day is tomorrow, and this week we're diving into all things love. And when things are going well in a relationship, many couples start talking about moving in together or, say, sharing in big financial commitments. But there's always that lingering worry. What if the relationship falls apart? Well, to mitigate that concern, some couples choose to sign prenuptials or cohabitation agreements. Joining us now to talk more about this is Erez Aloni. He's an associate professor at UBC's Allard School of Law. So, Erez, firstly, who should be having these conversations about possible prenups or cohabitation agreements?
Everybody. But since we live in British Columbia, so not only people who are about to get married, but also people who move in together, right? Because in British Columbia, people are recognized just like married couples after living in 2 years in marriage-like relationships. So if you are cohabiting with someone unmarried, you might need to start talking about this as well. So people are about to get married, people who live in married-like relationships, and who among them, right? Most people, but particularly people who might have assets from before. Assets from before the relationship began, like inheritance, for example, are excluded property. They're not part of the dividing of the family property that is divided. However, the appreciation during the relationship is dividable. So you want to make, if you don't want to share that with your partner, you want to address that. Another group is primary caregivers. So if you're, the mother, the person who's doing much of the care work and housework and making career sacrifices, etc., and that's going to hurt your savings, your progress in work, you might want to assure in advance that you're going to get spousal support.
Right.
Finally, couples who are more egalitarians and don't want to have these regular default rules. So for example, say same-sex couples who traditionally are more likely to divide their housework and care work more equally than others. Or elderly couples who maybe it's their second important relationship and they're concerned that there's something will happen to the inheritance. All those people are mainly, but I think all of us should think about those issues.
Very important topics, no matter how awkward. And with the cost of living here in BC especially so high, let's talk about couples in this province who are moving in together. What should they know before making that big move to essentially become common law?
So, I once did a study a few years ago. I interviewed 30 couples who live in unmarried relationships here in BC, and I've asked her, do you know that you are recognized as spouses? Most of them did not know. Others thought that it's a mandatory thing, so you can't opt out. So what people should know before they move in together is that after living 2 years continuously in married-like relationships, they're just like spouses. So unless they're ready to accept all the type of obligations that other spouses, married couples have, they need to sign a cohabitation agreement, which means that it must be written and witnessed. Witness can be anyone, so you don't even necessarily have to go to a lawyer, but you just write it down, maybe you follow online, look at some resources, look at some templates, and you can do it by yourself, although if it's more complicated, you might want to consult a lawyer.
All right, so no matter how perhaps awkward that conversation might be, you're saying it is encouraged for everyone to have those types of discussions.
We keep framing it as awkward, and I understand why. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat the situation, because studies show that when you try to modify default rules, people might look at it as kind of like, why are you doing it? But Think about it, it's the most important transaction of our lifetimes, right? And it's something that you can present it in a different way. You can say, look, let's talk about stuff. It might mean that you're very serious about your relationships. We do so many things in our daily lives, right? Like we file tax every year. We learn how to drive. There are so many important administrative tasks. This one is super important, more than your RRSP that you must have taken care of these days. So just maybe instead of thinking about it as awkwardness, think about it as being mature. It's not so exceptional. And if it's that awkward, then perhaps hire a lawyer. There are some lawyers that are less expensive than others and will know to do it with some mediation.
Right, so there are steps to make it pragmatic, but also still keep that spark alive. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your expertise on this.
Thank you.
That's Erez Aloni. He's an associate professor at UBC's Allard School of Law. Still ahead, what's old is new again, why co-op housing is back on the building block across Canada. More on that next.
This is one of the experiences that was going to be part of the winter oyster expedition, tonging for wild oysters and then eating them. The Oyster Master Guild was created to teach people all about oysters.
The Oyster Master Guild is really a network of oyster professionals, shuckers, oyster somms, chefs, restaurateurs, and enthusiasts who all really care about advancing oyster appreciation.
This is a spot here.
Julie Chu and business partner Patrick McMurray handpicked the group to visit PEI, some from the media, the restaurant industry, and social influencers. They only made it as far as Toronto, where they sampled PEI oysters and learned more about what makes them unique.
Say an influencer or a media personality that knows somewhat about oysters, then I get a chance to tell those stories, and Julie gets to tell the stories and introduce them to the growers. You will see afterwards the exponential storytelling that goes on and out and beyond the reach of what normally we can do.
This photographer from Toronto did make it to PEI before the storm and is capturing the oyster experience for future promotions and future trips.
Well, I think it makes just such a difference when you can actually meet the people and the growers behind the oysters. And when you get to taste it right from the bottom of the ocean, you can't get any fresher than that. So it's definitely an experience of a lifetime.
The Oyster Master Guild offers online training to become a certified oyster ambassador. The Level 1 course costs about $500. More than 130 people have taken the training so far from 12 countries. And the Guild is about to launch a Level 2.
Ultimately, I think if we can make a true global network of oyster service professionals and make this category of work a thing, if you will, like a profession that you can develop into, that you can learn and apprentice into, but in a structure where it's recognized throughout the world, that would be fantastic.
Plans are in the works for more trips to Prince Edward Island, more oyster experiences, and they hope, ultimately, more customers choosing PEI oysters. Nancy Russell, CBC News, Brudenell.
Welcome back. A BC government fund recently announced plans to buy 2 co-op housing locations in Coquitlam. About 250,000 Canadians already live in housing co-ops. The CBC's Tanya Fletcher breaks down why they've become so popular in Canada throughout the years.
The co-op has opened its doors to everyone.
Canada's first co-op apartment building.
Because managing a co-op means new responsibilities.
Today, the co-op buildings you see around the city are like relics of a bygone era, both when it comes to the architecture and also the cost of living in one. This nonprofit co-op in Riverdale is likely one of the oldest in the province. A one-bedroom here goes for, get this, $1,100, and a 4-bedroom, $1,800. To give you a bit of context, the average one-bedroom in Toronto right now is around $2,500. Needless to say, the people who live here love it.
This would be considered one of the bigger kitchens. Some of them just have literally a strip of a galley kitchen. As John says, there's balconies in all the units, which I didn't know. I assume most of them. If you went and saw 5 other units today, each one would be completely different than the other. All have pretty small bathrooms. These places are homes, and the whole breadth of life happens within them and spills outdoors, because we have these big courtyards, and sometimes it can be noisy and you're not in the mood for noise, but overall we cohabit pretty darn well.
And you also probably won't be surprised to hear that for the lucky few who lock down a co-op unit over the years, they tend to stick around. As long as you're paying the monthly charges and abiding by the rules, you are welcome to stay as long as you want. Anyone can apply, but lists to get into these buildings are years long, and members' families sometimes get priority.
I moved here when my son was 2, and he's now 35. And my daughter just moved here in December, and so I have grandkids here now too.
I've lived here for 40 years. I moved in the mid-80s. I'm particularly attracted to the self-management process of it. We're always encouraged to be on these committees. We have what we call a residence council, which involves with all the major decisions about how the place is run.
So let's take a moment to explain what exactly a co-op is. First, we should differentiate between a nonprofit and an equity co-op. Those are the ones you see listed for sale. You buy a share of the building, which is your unit, and you need the approval of the board to move in. But the type of co-ops we're talking about today are registered as not-for-profit corporations. This is over 90% of existing co-op housing stock in Canada. Members jointly own and manage the building they live in. The monthly housing charges are designed to cover expenses with surpluses reinvested into the co-op. The members do not build equity in their housing. If they move, their home is offered to another household.
Everyone who lives in a co-op decides, what the policies are, what the budgets are, the monthly housing charges, approval of certain capital expenses, repairs, some of the community programs that they put on. It's all a joint model that every member of a co-op contributes.
Most co-ops were created between the 70s and the 90s. So what happened between the 90s and today? Basically, money from the government to operate these buildings slowed down. Then the housing market exploded and the population grew. And now here we are in a housing crisis due to a lack of supply. And co-op buildings are back on the government's radar. We talked to Ontario's Associate Minister of Housing about this.
Why we're hearing about it now is we're at 15.5 million people going to 20 million pretty quickly, and we need all kinds of housing. And the cooperative model, the cooperative component, is an important part of that strategy. It needs to grow.
The province recently announced additional funding to support current co-ops and build new ones as part of its investment into housing.
Well, let me give you an example about the Kennedy site. So we removed development fees, right, for purpose-built rentals, which the cooperative model falls under. So that alone saves that site approximately $1.5 million of fees they would have had to pay before that housing initiative. As well, we removed the HST, the provincial portion.
This is the site he's talking about. It's currently a commuter parking lot. It's not much to look at yet, but it's going to be a pretty exciting and substantial project in Scarborough. And that's what really has people talking about co-op housing making a comeback.
This is the first co-op we've seen kind of come forward for around a generation, and it's on the back of the city's land. So this is city land that we invited partners to kind of tell us what they thought they could do with it. And what we're seeing is this great kind of mixed-use project. It's got community space, it's got retail, it's right next to a transit hub, and it's got both market ownership, but importantly for us, over 600 new co-op homes.
Abby Bond says the city hears a lot of feedback from the community about wanting more co-op housing, and it's a form of housing that's been proven to be successful. People are happy, they can live comfortably and work in their communities. So the fact that this is actually now happening is a big deal and could serve as a blueprint for more projects like this.
People seem really drawn to the idea, and I think it really gives people a greater sense of community, a greater sense that they can live here for the long term, they can make their home here.
It's a personal choice whether or not you love the idea of being a little more involved in your community, doing things like gardening and making big decisions about your space alongside your neighbors. Co-op members tell me at times there are challenges, but it's a lifestyle they love and one they hope that future generations get the chance to experience.
It's a really kind of grassroots engagement in terms of living situations, which is really, really energizing and positive for, you know, people living here. It's not that they're not challenges. There's some serious challenges, but at the same time, it's quite an amazing, rich experience living here.
I watched my kids try to get apartments in Toronto. Apartments in Toronto are insanely expensive. I don't know. Like, I walk around and wonder who lives in there, who can afford that. And the co-op is, to me, it's the role for the future because it is affordable.
So we may be entering a new era of the co-op. Whether or not it puts a dent in our housing crisis will largely depend on support from all levels of government and developers to make it happen. Talia Ricci, CBC News, Toronto.
Coming up, a protest outside a Toronto hospital has angered some politicians. Why some say it risked patient lives. That story is next.
It's almost a lottery ticket. Back then,
Lottery ticket, holy grail, find of the century. That's how many sports collectors are describing a recent discovery by a Regina family. Last month, they unearthed a crate of 1979 O-Pee-Chee brand hockey cards in their attic. There could be as many as 24 Wayne Gretzky rookie cards inside. In mint condition, these cards can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars each. They're auctioning them off, and the total amount has topped $2 million.
It's pretty extraordinary to find something that nobody thought existed. And the uniqueness of it is the fact that it's an unopened case. Obviously, it's been open now and the box is authenticated, but it's been put back together and been authenticated as what was originally a sealed case, which is really how it's done. But yeah, it's you would have thought that maybe somewhere along the line that one of these cases would have come out of a long-time collector or dealer's warehouse or basement, but it hadn't until this point.
According to one collector, the family's also selling more than a dozen other boxes of unopened hockey and baseball cards. They may not be from the Gretzky rookie year, but Mueller expects interest to be high.
Any unopened material like that from the 70s and earlier is just like bees to honey. They'll come after it. A lot of deep-pocketed collectors that love unopened stuff, and so they'll chase it down for sure, and they know it exists because the word is out.
The Regina family has asked to remain anonymous. It's unclear when the new cards will be put on the market, but bidding for the Gretzky cards is expected to close later this month. Jason Warwick, CBC News, Saskatoon.
Hey, I'm Rohith Joseph. Vibin' is the new show all about discovering great new songs and fresh artists from across BC and beyond. Stream Vibin' on CBC Listen.
Welcome back. Canadian politicians today lashed out at pro-Palestinian demonstrators who'd gathered outside a Toronto hospital last night and reportedly blocked access to it. Mount Sinai Hospital has deep roots in the local Jewish community. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the protest reprehensible and condemned it as anti-Semitic. Ontario Premier Doug Ford said the demonstrators may have violated the criminal code, as it's illegal to intimidate healthcare workers or to prevent people from accessing healthcare.
Folks, get some decency, have common sense. These hospitals are there to save lives. You know, Mount Sinai did everything they could to save my brother's life. He was in there, and they're an incredible hospital, along with all the hospitals around the province. They're there to help people. Do not break the law, because that's exactly what happened.
After the incident at the hospital, demonstrators were seen marching through the streets of downtown Toronto, and they could be heard banging drums and chanting support for Intifada. That's an Arabic term used to denote resistance movements. Toronto police today confirmed they are investigating several incidents that took place in the area. Many similar rallies have taken place across the country ever since the war between Israel and Hamas broke out in early October. In the meantime, talks aimed at reaching a truce between Israel and Hamas are underway in Cairo. Officials from U.S., Egypt, and Qatar are all taking part. And in Gaza, meanwhile, Palestinians are fleeing Rafah ahead of a possible Israeli military assault. Calls are mounting for Israel to hold back on a planned offensive in Rafah. The White House says Israel has an obligation to keep innocent civilians safe. More than 1 million people have fled to the city to escape fighting elsewhere and are living in makeshift camps. Israel says it wants to destroy the remaining Hamas militants in the area and free Israeli hostages being held there. They say they're making plans to evacuate trapped civilians in Rafah. In sports news, the NHL has suspended Toronto Maple Leafs defenseman Morgan Rielly for 5 games. The decision follows a hearing with the NHL's Department of Player Safety in New York. Rielly was punished for cross-checking an opponent during a game against the Ottawa Senators on Saturday.
Is going to put the finishing touches on an Ottawa win.
He did that after the Ottawa player, Ridley Grigg, fired a slap shot into an empty net with 5 seconds left in regulation time. Rielly has been a fixture on the Leafs' blue line since joining the club 10 years ago. He leads all but 3 of his teammates in scoring with 43 points in total. The Leafs take on the St. Louis Blues tonight, and the team is slated to play 6 games over the next 10 days. Weathercaster Victor Paolo joins us now with the look at the 5-day forecast. And Victor, you were saying Valentine's Day is set to be pretty nice. What about long term?
Well, long term, we're expecting some precipitation to come our way. But you know what? Let's not look that far ahead. Let's talk about tonight. Tonight is going to be a night where if you're someone who loves to stargaze, you can see that it's going to be quite clear. Not that much cloud cover, which is great to see right over here, the Vancouver area. But as we get a little bit closer towards the end of the week, here's what you will notice is happening in the region. You're going to see a lot of precipitation working its way up from the south, and it's eventually going to reach us. But when it does in the Vancouver area, it's not going to be in the form of snow because we're going to be still in a much warmer temperatures. Now, here's what it's going to be looking like for the weather currently. It is 9 degrees in Tofino, 8 degrees in Vancouver, 7 in Victoria. But as you can see, a lot of this blue when it comes to north of where we're located, north of BC, that's where you're going to find a lot of snow. So if you have a lot of time in your hands and you're hoping for a more snowy Valentine's Day, this is probably the area you'd like to be. But you want to bundle up because it's going to be much colder than it is over here in Vancouver. But here we go. Taking a bit of a look later on in the day, what's going to look like for your Thursday. You can see a lot of the cold weather is inching its way close to us. But by the time we reach Friday and into the weekend, it's going to slowly but surely lift itself away as we are getting in towards the start of next week. But the big story is for the next 48 hours, we're going to be expecting a beautiful Valentine's Day here in the Vancouver area. And if you ask me, there's no better way to spend Valentine's Day. But let's talk about tonight. Tonight is going to be 0 degrees, and we're expecting just a touch of cloud cover like you do see here. And when we start our day tomorrow around 8 o'clock, it's going to be 1 degree, and it's going to be a touch of cloud cover, but we're expecting the sun to give us a little bit of a visit. Quick look at our 3- and 5-day forecast. Well, we're expecting the temperatures to still stay warm by the weekend, but we're expecting a bit of precipitation on Sunday. Hey, happy Valentine's Day. Over to you.
To you as well. Thank you so much, Victor.
Always a pleasure.
It is common to see wildlife warning signs in BC for bears, coyotes, and cougars. But after the break, we'll show you the novelty warning that's popped up in Dawson Creek and why it's giving residents quite the laugh. Stay with us.
Have you ever bought a bag of candy and opened it to realize that there isn't really much in there? And you could swear there was more candy in these bags a few years ago. This could be because of something called shrinkflation. Shrinkflation is when a product gets smaller or has less content, but its price stays the same. You might notice it more in food or drink products. Shrinkflation can happen when the cost of making a product rises. For example, when raw materials become more expensive or when companies have to pay their workers more. So, when the cost of making the product rises, the price of the product usually goes up too. But companies fear that customers might not buy their stuff anymore if it gets too expensive, so instead of boosting prices, they do something that's less obvious. They make the product smaller or use less of it. This way, companies can still make money even when the cost of making the product goes up. This isn't the only sneaky way companies try to cut costs. There's also something called skimflation. That's when companies swap out ingredients in their products for cheaper ones. They do it without lowering the price and often without telling customers, so it can be even harder to spot. Check out these 2 lists of ingredients for Quaker Dips bars. Can you spot what's different? Take a second to look. The box for these older bars says they're made with milk chocolate, which includes sugar and cocoa butter. But the coating on the newer bars was made with palm oil, which is cheaper. Products need to use cocoa butter, not vegetable oil, and have a certain amount of cocoa in them to be considered chocolate. And it looks like that one didn't make the cut. That's why the ingredients say chocolate tea coating instead of just chocolate. A food researcher and professor told us, if you don't want to get tricked by shrinkflation and skimflation, look closer at food packaging or read the labels. Maybe you'll notice if they change over time. That's all for now. For CBC Kids News, I'm Aubrey Chan.
Hey, stop scrolling for a sec. Do you know a kid who's great on camera and always seems to know what's happening in the world? Then keep listening, because I have some inside information to share. The CBC Kids News team is hiring. We're looking for someone aged 9 to 15 who loves getting to the bottom of a great story. Know the perfect person? Well, then you need to get this opportunity to them, like today, because this can be their chance. It's a pretty big gig. And did I mention we pay? CBCKidsNews.ca. The search is on.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. On March 8th, join CBC Vancouver's Michelle Elliott for a morning of transformative social change at West Coast Leaf's annual fundraiser, The Equality Breakfast. For tickets, visit westcoastleaf.org. And CBC Vancouver's the media partner at the alumni UBC event, Shaping Solutions for the Housing Crisis, March 11th. Explore this multifaceted issue with panel members who will share their diverse ideas about solving this problem. Register at alumniubc.ca.
A series of contemporary Black Canadian art is on display at 4 SkyTrain stations across Metro Vancouver. You can see them at the Main Street Science World Station, Granville, Stadium Chinatown, and VCC Clark. The installations vary in style from Afrofuturism to printmaking and quilting. They all spotlight African and Black presence and history in the city, and they'll remain there for the next 2 years. A wildlife warning sign in Dawson Creek has people cracking up. It says "Caution Mouse" in the area. The sign was spotted by a resident behind the town's library. She posted this photo online and it has since gone viral. But if you look carefully, you can see that the U in mouse was changed from an O. City officials say the sign fell prey to a prankster who's changed the sign's wording. Moose wandering into town are, yes, a serious concern for the area, but residents couldn't help but laugh at this artfully adjusted sign. Well, thank you for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem. That's our free app, as well as on YouTube and on our website. We're at cbc.ca/BC. I'll be back with your next local newscast at 11 o'clock tonight, right after the National. Thanks so much for being with us. Good night.